Today, our speaker is David Lewis, and he's going to speak on the subject of climbing outside the box to see the beauty in nature and people.
Thank you, and I'm happy to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm David Lewis. I've been the executive director of SAEB the Bay for the last 20 years. I was born and raised here in the Bay Area, actually in Palo Alto. I was born in 1961, the same year that SAEB the Bay was started, actually. And I spent about 15 years on the East Coast after college, working in Washington, D.C., on nuclear arms control issues, actually, and in the U.S. Senate, and on some elections and politics. And now I'm back here. Been back here for 20 years, and I live in the Berkeley Hills with my family. I love your motto. And so I thought I'd start today with, without speaking for a few minutes in service of your motto, and especially the wonder portion, and just share some images with you. And then I'll try to do the images justice with a few words.
Cool.
You tell I'm partial to pelicans. All these images are taken right here in the Bay Area. Actually, all of these are local photographers who donated images to us for a calendar that we do every year with nature photos from the Bay Area. I think I'll start with a story and end with a story. How many of you have lived here in the Bay Area for at least 10 years? Keep your hands up if you've been here 20 years. 30 years? 40 years? 50 years? Okay, my brothers. I was born here 56 years ago. So we have all this beauty around us here in the Bay Area, this natural beauty. We have the Bay. We have these amazing parks all along the East Bay Hills. We have within a short drive amazing redwood forests. Just a few more hours to someplace like Yosemite or Lake Tahoe. We're really surrounded with beauty, and that natural beauty that we see is pretty similar in some ways to what was here before a big increase in population, which was basically the gold rush 150 years ago. So before the gold rush, this area still had pronghorn antelope and grizzly bears and many more salmon and many more birds than we have here now. And then we've had a very big population growth, mostly in the last century, and a huge alteration of the natural environment through massive development, and now more than 7 million people living in this very dense area. So it's not an accident that this area was changed so much. It was changed by people. But it's also not an accident that we still have the natural beauty that we have in the midst of this very built-up area. That's a result of direct actions of people as well. So when I was born here in the Bay Area, this was a common site. This is the garbage dump in East Palo Alto, Cooley Landing. And the bay was ringed with garbage dumps. That's where all of our trash went into the bay. The bay was shallow, and the edges were marshes. They were called swamps, but they were marshes, and they were considered smelly and unhealthy, so they're so shallow, why not just fill them in? And garbage and construction debris was the way to do it. The reason the garbage is burning is so that it would take up less space, so they could put in more garbage. This is Burlingame. You're looking kind of at the airport in the background in Millbrae. Another example of material being dumped in the bay to create new land, push the edge of the bay out farther, and fill in between. Right here in Berkeley, the shoreline, the historic shoreline, is where the railroad tracks are now. So everything on the bay side of the railroad tracks has been filled in since then. The marina and Cesar Chavez Park, that was Berkeley's dump. The most of Emeryville, that was Emeryville's dump. The Albany Bowl, that was Albany's dump, and so on. In the early 60s, the city of Berkeley had a plan to more than double the size of the city by filling in everything out to the end of the Berkeley Pier for more development and housing and an airport and a shopping mall. The other thing we were dumping in the bay was sewage. The sign says sewage discharge, do not use beach or water. That's Crissy Field. So all of the sewage in all of the Bay Area went into the bay untreated until about the late 60s. And on the left, that's Brisbane. Not that far from where Candlestick Park is. See the cars dumped in the water. So that's really how we were treating the bay, as a dump. And in the midst of this, 3 women who were living in the Berkeley Hills, who were inspired by the bay's beauty and could see it disappearing before their eyes, read about a plan to fill in most of the remaining shallow areas of the bay. By that point, the bay was already a third smaller from all of the diking and filling that had gone on. And there were plans to fill, or an idea about filling 60% of what was left, and it would have left a narrow river for navigation. That's a cartoon version from the Oakland Tribune in the 1960. And so the women on the far right, Kate Kerr, the wife of Clark Kerr, who was head of the University of California, and Sylvia McLaughlin and Esther Gulick, they started organizing in a revolutionary grassroots model called dialing the phone, because the phones had dials, and enlisting their neighbors in support of a cause to stop the city of Berkeley from filling in all that property. They were massively successful with this grassroots movement. They actually mobilized tens of thousands of people in the Bay Area to prevail on Sacramento to declare the Bay was public property and should be regulated. The first ever coastal zone management agency in the world was created to put a moratorium on filling in the bay and regulate the shoreline. The Bay Conservation and Development Commission still exists today. It's the model for the California Coastal Commission that does the same thing along the whole Pacific coast. And that's Ronald Reagan signing the bill to create that agency in 1969. So after that, there was pretty much an end to filling in the bay. And in fact, in the last few years, we've started to restore the bay. So the thing that's important, many things that are important about this story, this movement actually inspired the efforts in the Bay Area and around the country to protect urban bodies of water, to save urban parklands, to save the redwoods, to save Point Reyes, all citizen action on behalf of the environment in an urban area. And that was a new thing. The conservation movement before then had been focused on wild places and national parks far away from cities. So this was part of a number of movements in the 60s that were taking back our homes, taking back our lives. But I want you to remember what I said briefly, which is that these women, they were not biologists, they were not chemists, they actually were not experienced political activists. They were motivated by beauty. They were motivated by beauty, and they were able to organize and unify people from various political persuasions. Actually, at least 2 of them were registered Republicans, and there's some Republicans in that photo. They managed to unify people with lots of different backgrounds in support of one cause. So the movement became the Save the Bay organization, and it's continued on to today. We've worked on different issues over the years after stopping the bay from being filled in. And the bay's facing different threats right now. The pollution threat is no longer factories and refineries and sewage, it's trash. This is a creek in San Jose, but any of you were out on the shoreline yesterday for a coastal cleanup day, you know there's a lot of trash in the water and a lot of trash on the shoreline, and it comes from all of us. Trash comes from our roads. The storm drains in most of the Bay Area don't go to a treatment plant, and they're not screened. So everything that's on the roads ends up in the bay. Those storm drains get connected to the nearest creek and go right to the bay. That's why we have an international problem with ocean trash. So Save the Bay is working to stop that. We're also facing new threats from climate change. This is a picture of the South Bay. The red and purple are areas that are at risk of flooding in the next 30 to 50 years, depending on the rate of sea level rise. And some enterprising person put the logos of all the high-tech companies that are located in that inundation area on this map to inspire people. There's also schools and sewage treatment plants and homes. I assure you, if it becomes untenable for the Facebook campus to be in the face of, in the path of sea level rise, they'll move. They can afford it. But it's a lot more difficult to move sewage treatment plant, and if that gets flooded, the sewage will back up into all of our homes. It's a lot more difficult to move roads and train tracks and shared infrastructure that's in the path of flooding. But we do have this incredible opportunity because a lot of the areas that were diked off there for salt evaporation ponds are now back in public ownership, part of the largest urban wildlife refuge in the country, and waiting to be restored back to wetlands that actually provide important habitat for endangered species, but also flood protection. And the way this restoration works is really quite dramatic. This is the same salt pond on the left and the right. Before and after the levees are breached, the tides are allowed to come back in with sediment and mud and the wetland plant seeds, and the area revegetates into a lush marsh. The fish come back, the birds come back, and those wetlands also help protect when there's a very high tide or a big storm, help protect the shoreline. So in addition to doing a lot of advocacy for that kind of work to happen, Save the Bay actually enlists thousands of volunteers a year to help replant areas of the shoreline right next to the tidal marsh, replace weeds with native plants that we grow in our own nurseries, and we enlist both adult groups and students to do this kind of work. So we're engaging people in hands-on restoration of the bay. So within the last year, I think it's been a pretty dark time for many of us for lots of reasons. But this particular part of our history as a region actually has been a great source of hope and encouragement for me and for a lot of other people that I work with. Because it's a great reminder both of the power that people have to change and improve the place we live when we work together. And it's also a great reminder about the power of beauty to inspire us to overcome our fears and anxieties and actually do something positive, whether it's for the Bay or for some other cause in our community. It's really quite a wonderful contrast, actually, when you think about how people have come together in a very diverse community to save the natural places that we love, preserve them, and even improve them for the next generation. And I think in this time when we see a big increase in acts of hatred and intolerance and disunity and conflict, that there can be a different approach. You know, it wasn't that long ago that we dammed rivers and cut down forests and drove wildlife almost to extinction and almost filled in San Francisco Bay. But we united to save some of these places through decades of hard work. And the natural open space that we have makes us not only healthier, but a richer place, a desirable place to live. Maybe even too desirable sometimes. But that's why companies want to be here. That's why people want to live here. That's why people visit and choose to stay. Well, also wasn't that long ago that we exterminated native tribes who were living here. We locked up some of our neighbors in internment camps. We prohibited people from living in certain areas. We redlined areas so they couldn't get mortgages and housing. We excluded blacks and Jews from living in certain neighborhoods. That also was not very long ago. And in contrast, wasn't more than a decade after one mayor in San Francisco decided to marry people of the same gender, and now it's the law of the land that people can do that. So that makes me hopeful that we can create a more equitable and just society, and the fact that we live in something of a bubble and a special place here in Berkeley, here in the Bay Area, sometimes makes it difficult to understand the intolerance that's happening in other places. But I also think it gives us a special responsibility here in California to do what we can do, both for ourselves and also as a model to people in other places of what can be achieved in their diverse community through unity. So I think we can find the inspiration to do that from the successful efforts in the past here to overcome these kinds of challenges. And what it takes most is inspiration to confront that fear, to get up off the mat. I face that myself as a leader of a small group of employees, as a parent of school-age kids, as a husband of a wife who worries more than I do. Those are all my personal challenges. And so to me, one of the inspirations is the beauty that's around us. And so I thought I'd end with another story about what it means to live in a beautiful place that we don't always appreciate. I don't know if you've had Malcolm Margolin here as a speaker, but if you haven't yet, you really should. He's a local treasure, great storyteller and writer. He founded Payday Books, which is an independent publisher here in Berkeley that publishes amazing, wonderful books, including a lot of great California history. But Malcolm tells a story, which I'll try to do justice. 20 years ago, he was visited by the Russian poet Yevtushenko, who had been persecuted and challenged in his own native Russia, but was here on a trip to the San Francisco Bay Area with his wife and with an interpreter. And so Malcolm took the poet Yevtushenko and his wife and the interpreter for a day touring around the Bay Area. They went to San Francisco, and they went to Green's Restaurant in Fort Mason. They crossed the Golden Gate Bridge, and they went to the Marin Headlands. He took them up to Mount Tamalpais, and they had a picnic with a view of the bay. And they had fresh baked French bread and fantastic cheese and delicious wine. And in the middle of this picnic, the wife of Yevtushenko said something to the translator in Russian, which of course Malcolm couldn't understand. And Malcolm asked the translator what the wife had said. And he said, well, she said that it's as if she had been living her whole life in a box. And somebody suddenly opened it up and let her out. And she could see the world. So she was thanking him for taking her out of the box. So I wonder how many of you have had an experience like that, maybe not of living in Russia for decades before coming to the Bay Area, but maybe coming back to the Bay Area after having been away, maybe even on a short trip. And what it's like to fly back in and see this place from the window, or even step out of the airport and feel that fresh air, or the shivering fog, if you've been dressed in shorts coming from someplace warmer. And just how that feels. Or maybe you've had a visitor here from out of town. Sometimes the only time we go to these special places is when we're showing them to somebody else who hasn't seen them hundreds of times. I've certainly had that experience throughout my life, being reminded of what a special place we live in because I'm showing it to somebody else. And it's wow. You mean you don't come here all the time? So, I think too often we put ourselves in that box, and that's something we have complete control over. We don't need to do that. Because for us, we don't have to travel from Russia, we don't have to get a difficult visa, we don't have to do anything but go outside and open our eyes and open our hearts. Just after the election, this may be the last thing I'll say, that just after the election I found myself at the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco. And of course there was spectacular art to look at. But I was stunned, actually, to open my eyes and notice how many beautiful people there were around me. Maybe not fashion model beautiful, but all colors of people. All types, all ages. And stunningly, everybody was having a good time. They all looked engaged. They were all smiling. There were no kids crying. They didn't seem to be too worried about what was happening outside the museum. And all I had to do was open my eyes and appreciate that. And I'm very glad I did. If you want to appreciate more of the Bay, or look for places around the Bay to appreciate that you haven't seen, you can come to our website anytime. We do a lot of volunteer activities on the shoreline, but we also have a lot of suggestions about places to see. And we started a holiday last year for people to appreciate the Bay and celebrate the Bay. It's the first Saturday of October. This will be the second year. A lot of our partners throughout the region are having events on the shoreline to celebrate the bay. Angel Island, Jack London Square, over by the Giants ballpark down in Redwood City. So most of it is free. I encourage you to come out and appreciate the bay. And if you can't do it on October 7th, it turns out any other day is just fine. So thank you very much for inviting me.
All right.